Welcome to Set Life. I'm Amber Buto, and this is
Kelly Leger.
And we have not just a friend of the studio, but a friend of mine in the studio with us to talk about her amazing, amazing, amazing book series, the future of it, and everything. Laura, thank you so much for coming and sitting with us.
Yeah, so glad to be here.
Yeah. So, okay. Author, speaker, mother, wife, so many other things that you're capable of doing and have done. But let's talk about writing. Let's talk about where that started for you.
Yeah, it started with a big passion way back in 2008 to spread the message of biblical sexuality. So I started writing nonfiction and speaking to parents and teenagers, which really came out of my own brokenness and not knowing what the Bible has to say about all that, just having a big compassion for sexual brokenness. So I thought that's what I would do, is speak on that, write on that. I was perfectly content. And then it hit me right around 2012 as I was traveling and speaking quite a bit on that when we lack a sober understanding that there's a spiritual war, that there are unseen spiritual forces, that our morality isn't just about being good or behaving, there truly is an enemy that is waiting to exploit our disobedience, our rebellion. It changes everything. And I realized that as we're talking to teenagers about sexuality, and again, the consequences of that, potential consequences, and protecting our sexuality, we really needed to introduce into the conversation the reality of spiritual warfare. It changes everything. It's a whole mindset shift. So that launched me into thinking I was going to write another nonfiction, this time about spiritual warfare. But the Lord nudged me to do fiction. And I wrestle with that because personally I get bored with fiction and I read a lot of fiction. But as I sat down to write, it flowed. And that's not to say it wasn't hard work. I made every rookie mistake you can think of, but I didn't know I was making a mistake. So I just enjoyed the process and ended up with a story that centers around a high school that has a suicide epidemic, and really chose the issue of suicide, not knowing prophetically really how it was going to become an exponential issue. It's always been a problem, but become so much worse in recent years. But it also epitomizes believing lies and losing sight of love and losing sight of who we are. So that's a key issue throughout. And then we have a protagonist who doesn't believe in God, doesn't believe in any of that, just wants to graduate and get out of this high school. But he becomes the one who can see through a series of events these demonic forces that he calls creepers because he has no biblical vernacular for that. And he also sees the light. So then he has to warn his classmates that this stuff is real when he himself is wrestling with his own sanity and what he believes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It's a lot. It's a lot in that nugget. So good.
I'm like, gosh.
So good.
I love it. I love all of it. I mean, man. Yeah. I mean, our battle is not against flesh and blood. You know, some people don't know where the fight is. Some people don't know what the weapons are. Some people don't know how to use the weapons if they know what the weapons are. And those are huge deals. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you would think perhaps that it would become scary or actually detrimental to bring in the concept of the demonic world into this conversation about mental health. But what we found is it's very empowering to realize, wait, these thoughts are coming from somewhere. Someone's after me. That's because I'm so valuable. It's not because I'm worthless. It's the very opposite. So we've had young people read the Delusion series, which is the name of the books, and actually choose life when they were plotting suicide. And those stories have gotten back to us. And so whereas some would say it's dangerous to introduce the concept of the demonic world and how it impacts mental health, I would say it's dangerous not to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. You mean every thought that goes through my head isn't mine?
That's correct. And of course, you know, there's everything from a vitamin deficiency to life experiences that can be depressing. So we don't want to give the devil more credit than he deserves, but he exploits brokenness, pain, rebellion. But if we don't know that, I mean, what is the worst enemy? It's the one you don't know you have.
That's true.
So it's cruel not to tell young people and adults that this is a reality and bring that biblical worldview in to the conversation.
Wow. Well, you know what I love is you're taking this topic that if you've ever heard of any of these topics, you probably heard it taught or preached, but not told in a narrative. And that opens up the listener to a whole nother type of receptivity. I love that you have done it that way in a story.
Yeah, which, Kelly, I know your wheels are just spinning.
Oh, they're going crazy.
Yes, this is so your world. Since Kelly and I met, we have talked about how do we artistically and creatively tell stories as a storyteller from our best friend, Jesus, who was a phenomenal storyteller. How do we tell stories that evoke emotions, but then don't just leave you there, but also change the trajectory of your life?
That's right.
And those are stories we've dreamed on, talked on, thought about. You're writing on some of them now that are just so brilliant, that have truth woven all through them, that are very, very creatively done in a way that when you watch it, it gives you a new perspective to ask certain questions that could lead to life-altering, changing life decisions.
Yes.
And I think that's creativity to its nth degree, right? And if you look at the films that we've all watched, they do that in their own messaging way, in their own characters, in their stories, and what we're watching and seeing, and they're telling us, and all of that. I believe that we're just as creative to come up with the same ways, the same concept for the good in this world that can intercede goodness into this. So I know the first time that I'd heard about the Delusion series, and I was so fascinated by the creepers. I was so fascinated by this kid who could see in the spiritual realm, because somebody who loves Jesus and loves the faith that I have, and are very aware of, that there is a spiritual realm and that there's this earthly realm and all of that. How cool I have fascinated on, like, what if we could see in this realm? What would that look like? What would we do with that? And, you've heard different stories. So to bring this to a character that can see that way and not fully understand it, because I also think that is so real and relevant. I think we do see those things. We just don't know what to call it or what it is exactly. Is creative brilliance at its finest. I do. I'm
so
super
thankful.
excited.
I'm thankful that somebody picked up the task to do it. I think we mentioned earlier. I think you maybe even mentioned Frank Peretti's book, or Piercing or This Present Darkness. Yeah. And I think I remember years ago, if I'm not mistaken, it was like Spielberg had the rights to that book, actually, to do that at some point. I don't think anything ever happened to that development-wise. And I'm like, you're talking about, I'm like, finally somebody's going to do something like that, in that vein, at least, That's awesome.
Yeah, if you think about it, every movie has some battle between good and evil, and it's just astounding that we've never done the ultimate symbols of and literal forces of angels and demons. And I believe God's reserved that space for such a time as this. And to your point about the story, it was so important that the protagonist asked really hard questions. So you can imagine, if you can see in the spirit realm, you see these amazing angels that Owen, my protagonist, calls watchmen. Why don't they intervene every time? What kind of father allows demonic attacks? God the Father. Yeah. And so it was really neat and important to not only show these things, but ask the hard questions that we should all wrestle with. We should all ask these questions, why do these things happen? And it's so amazing, not that we get all the answers on this side of eternity, but God stands ready to explain and to show the origin of humanity and how this happened and why we're in the situation we're in. So throughout the series, it's currently a 3-book series, working on the 4th and 5th. Yay. Throughout the series, there's just some really hard, real questions that like I said, if we're not wrestling with, we should be. And there's awesome answers on the other side, but they don't come easy. They don't come without asking, and ultimately asking the right source, which is God and His Word.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you're right on bringing it to the table. And here's what I say on mental health in that is, how do you approach mental health from one angle? In my opinion, you can approach it from the scientific level, but we're not one-dimensional people.
That's right.
In most all faith-oriented things, scientists, all will say we're not one-dimensional. I mean, we can all agree on that. You know, you've got your IQ, your EQ, you got your spiritual, you've got your physical, you've got all these things that we've defined, right? In society. So I'm with you that it's crazy to not bring it to the table, because it is a facet of who we are, you know, and whatever that belief system is for you, you still believe that there is something greater, there is something else, you know. And this just happens to be the version in which, the filter in which we see through. You know, we see it for the demonic realm that it is. But bringing that to the table is essentially what you're saying in the book, is you got to ask those hard questions.
You do. And just consider that behind nearly every single mental health disorder is a fear. Think about that. Fear is incredibly spiritual. It's psychological. It's extremely physical. Our bodies react to fear, and it can be everything from trauma to abuse to shame to that demonic voice. They all work together, spirit, soul, and body. So to make it just about the meds, which is the physical, or to make it just about the counseling, what if we take all three? Yes. The spiritual perspective of what's going on, the psychological perspective of my mindsets that I have to take responsibility for, and then finally that physical part that is so real in the experience. As someone who's walked through it, as someone who's had trauma and depression, and here I'd written this series already when it hit my life like a freight train, and suddenly this very issue of suicide became a temptation for me after I'd written these books. I was actually working on the third one at the time, and recognized it as very demonic again, very psychological things from my childhood, and then working through the physical aspects of how it just makes you feel horrible physically. Yeah. My heart goes out to those suffering that way, because I've walked through it and I know how hard it is.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's done in such a great creative way through your writing, through the gift that you've been given to write, which it is brilliant. I mean, you can get it on audiobook, you can get it on, okay, I'm going to show it already. Like it's beautiful on top of that. I mean, it's just so well done. And listening to it, I have just enjoyed it immensely, how well you develop your characters in it. You write in such a way that you can picture everything that's there, you know, from the textures to the feels to the, you know, what the emotion would be in that scenario. And okay, again, I see through movie filters, so I'm also envisioning the movie,
that's
you know,
right.
Because that's one of the things that's being in the works right now too, is converting these into films, and the screenplays of them and all of that, and knowing that we're going to be able to create this story that I truly believe saves lives. You know, it's content for the good of this world that's thoroughly entertaining, because it is so well written. You know, the storyline and everything is so well done that you get lost in these characters, which is the goal, you know, to identify with the characters, to identify with the storyline, whether it's the love interest or the lead or the kid that's being, you know, preyed upon by this creeper or whatever, right? You can relate to all of it, the traumatic homes, you know, there's just all different things, school. I just think for the youth today, yeah, it's brilliant.
How was it going from nonfiction to fiction, right? I mean, you have this background, you have this expertise, you have to write, you have to know what you're writing, you know. How was it, as opposed to presentation, teaching, ministering, now taking all of that and packaging up into fiction? What was that like?
Well, thanks for asking. First, it was a huge prayer component, because I would ask, what does sin look like in the spirit realm? What does unforgiveness, how would we symbolize that? How would we put a visual aid to that? We know the enemy has so abused the principle that you can't unsee something. So let's use that for good. Let's put imagery that now I can't unsee what unforgiveness looks like. I know it now. And so God was so good to give the creative side of that. Of course, he's the ultimate storyteller and parables, but really it was backing off teaching point blank, like I love to do, tell it like it is, and let things evolve through story. And I have to say, my editors at Tyndale were just hugely invaluable. I'd encourage anyone, don't wait till you're qualified to start, because I'm living proof. I obeyed. I wrote the book. It was self-published and stayed that way for years and looked like that was what it was just going to be, which isn't even a bad thing this day and age. But then Tyndale picked it up, had a million changes and improvements they wanted me to make. And so then only now, when I submitted my third book manuscript, they said, wow, you've really grown as a writer. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, thanks to you guys teaching me. But I started off obedient.
Yeah.
I started off willing and did the very best I could.
Yep.
So it was just different, but it's so fun writing fiction. I love it. It's a work. Just because God's blessing you doesn't mean you sit down and it just flows perfectly.
Right.
You know, you have days where you're like, it's not coming to me. But I always just stop and pray, and I don't do anything from striving or performance. I just refuse. That's not God's will for us. So I would just take a break, pray, and it's amazing. Even just recently with the fourth book, I had started down a trail. It wasn't really flowing, and I just saw the first scene, and it was this conversation with God, like, really? That's how it's going to start? Okay, you know?
Yeah.
So it's a faith thing.
Yeah.
And it's just when you're called and anointed to do something, it's Him, and there's a grace, and
Wow.
yeah.
Well, you have so many, like you said, wheels turning. You have the creative side, the writing side of me, and then you have the spiritual side and the deliverance side of me turning at the same time. On the writing side.
Yes.
So we go from teaching, and God starts taking you down this path of being, because we know it in fiction, now you're describing worlds and you're describing characters and you're putting it in characters and stories, and there's subtext. There's so many layers to writing, period, right? So that's one thing. Now you're going to screenplay, where you're not reading a book, it's a visual medium. And of course, the old saying is you try to show as much as you can without saying it. But if you've only ever said it, how does that journey go? What's that look like?
It starts off as a hot mess of a screenplay.
Yes.
As I learned from a wise screenplay writer, he said that the novel's like a walk-in closet and your screenplay is like a suitcase. So when you love all these plot points and you love all these characters, but you're trying to pare it down, it's really hard. But once again, it's listening to critique, educating yourself, reading books, letting people speak into the project who care about the project. Because you have people who criticize just for criticism's sake, and you have to weed those people out.
Right.
But people who see the value in it, and you listen to people who are wiser and more advanced and more educated in that. And we are on an 11-year journey, you guys.
Yeah.
11 years I've been working on this.
Yeah.
So I've had lots of time.
What were some, what were like some, advice, critiques that you got that were milestones? That when they said that, you were like, oh, it shifted some things.
Yes, I realized because my fear was that fiction is boring. I'm very plot driven. There's this exciting thing happening, and it was a defining moment to learn that you're not developing the characters. Like they're just kind of bland. I'm like, oh, okay, yes, we need to love the characters. We need to know the characters. That's not boring.
Yeah.
Getting to know them. So that was a major change.
How did you do it? Like, how did you get them to love? How do you get to love a character?
Well, believe it or not, by giving them quirks and imperfections. And it's a funny dynamic, but the more neurotic they are, the more intrigued we are by them. Yeah. It's kind of the rule of thumb. And so giving them their little quirks, and then you're always trying to give quirks that reflect off the protagonist. So if our protagonist, for example, has no faith and you surround him by someone who is constantly optimistic and full of faith, maybe even obnoxiously so, it's going to help modify our protagonist. It's how are things bouncing off of him. And then I also would find people I know and love and would put their personality, strengths and weaknesses. And like in my mind, I'll never go public with who is who. But in my mind, I knew who it was. And
that's why they have those little disclaimers.
Yeah, exactly. Just I'll take that one between me and Jesus. But that helps to craft a character. And then being realistic. I do have my degree in psychology. And so trying to be realistic to how people think and behave and how young people think and behave. Since there's so many young people in it, was really important to me.
Wow. Wow. I'm just going to keep going here.
I know, I'm going to let you, because this is so your...
Inspiration. Like, what inspirations, like, where did you pull from? What was there things you were reading? Obviously, you had the biblical foundation. What were the inspirations behind all of them?
That's a very fun question to answer because there's virtually nothing in the books that isn't based on someone's real life experience.
Wow.
And you may find that hard to believe because there's some freaky supernatural stuff that happens, but one way or another, it tied to an experience. Some of them are mine. Some of them are stories people have told me, but I didn't want to make up spiritual things that don't happen. So again, you just have to read it to understand what I'm saying, but it'd be fun sometime to talk about the real life stories that inspired these various scenes and plot points, because man, there is some weird stuff that goes on.
So it's so true.
Freaky stuff.
Everything in this book is based on inspiration from real life stories.
For the most part, there is this well water that has this mystical effect, and that, I will say, is not a literal thing. That is more just story creativity. But outside of that, a lot of the spiritual encounters that the protagonist Owen has, they are based on things that people I believe are credible have had similar experiences enough to pull from. Just as an example, in book 2, there's this spirit, I don't want to give away too much, but that is visiting Owen. And he says to him at one point, do you think you can just get rid of me? And I had an experience where a young man came to me. He said his grandfather was coming to see him at night. His grandfather's dead, by the way. I said, that's not your grandfather. I grabbed his hands and prayed. The TV came on by itself. Like, just turn it off. Don't worry about it. We'll pray. Sure enough, he calls me. That spirit is in my room, but he's scary. His eyes are red. And he's saying, you think you can just get rid of me now? So like that really happened. And I had to walk this kid through what to say to this demon that he had entertained. And he actually had a shirt in his closet that had a pentagram that had been used in an occult ritual. So he took it outside and burned it. Yes, there was a bonfire. His family was sitting around a bonfire. I thought that was odd at the time, but I believed him, and he went and burned it. So again, there's lines from things like that where I've learned and heard, again, credible people that these things can happen.
So just to like seed people, like let's call it a teaser. Like that was a real life story. Some of that is in the book. You're talking about some kind of inroad that the demonic has into an individual's life, whether it be an experience, a trauma, even an item participated with. Is that what we're talking about here?
Exactly. It is so important to my heart to show people how the devil gains access and how we shut him out. We are literally in a war. Of course, at the core of that is knowing God and knowing his love, which is just totally opposite of all things evil and dark. And so, I mean, what do you do when you have an opponent? You study. If it's football, we're going to look at their playbook. If it's war, we're going to look at their military strategies. But somehow we act like, it's unsafe to learn about the devil's schemes. We're told not to be ignorant. You don't have to be highly educated. I mean, these are simple, profound, but they're simple to understand. And young people need to know, because what used to be hidden in darkness, and actually the word occult means hidden, it's not hidden anymore.
Right.
Witchcraft has become trendy.
Right.
These things are becoming, literally, we're seeing the dark become light, so to speak. It's not turning into light, but it's coming into the light. So how much more do we need to be educating young people who are just naively thinking, oh, crystals are cool. I'll cast a spell. And they have no idea if you actually invited a demon of suicide or depression, or you don't know what you're getting, right? When you open the door and then they don't know why they're having these crippling problems. We should tell them. We should help them. We should love them and tell them the truth.
Drop the mic.
Yes.
Yes.
Amazing. I mean, and so you're doing it, I believe, in an absolute God-designed way. I believe that. I believe that this, you are using something that could be used for good, for evil. In fact, you could call media neutral, about as neutral as this microphone.
Yeah.
And it can be used whichever way. You can use a tree a lot of ways, right? But I like you are using it. I think that what you're doing is in some ways really pioneering for what we've talked about in film and media, especially in I don't even want to just say Christian media. It's better, it's bigger, it's deeper than that. You are
It's in media.
In media.
Period.
You're hitting some topics that people have either gone way on one side, horror, and not giving anybody any answers.
Right.
Just like it's for the sake of monetary gain, for scaring people's socks off, blah 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 blah. But you're bringing like I don't know. I mean, you can help me with this, okay? But we have heard it quoted more often. Recently a lot, Christian horror. Yeah. Right. And every time we're like, what is that? What does that even mean? What are you getting at? And I'm not suggesting that this is horror. I think that you said it best when you said it is like a Frank Peretti's, Piercing the Darkness and a Stranger Things Coming Together. Neither one I would necessarily consider horror, but you're finding this place of deliverance.
Psycho thriller.
Paranormal thriller, psychological
thriller, but kind of way.
Full on positive, delivering, helping, saving, pulling people out of that, not pushing them further into it.
Yeah.
It's just, anyway.
Or just showing it without showing an answer.
Right.
Which is a lot of what typically happens. Mm-hmm. I mean, they escape it sometimes, but they don't really show how it just stops or whatever.
Yeah, right.
They win over it, or it wins over them, but it's never really it's just the arc of the story.
Yeah.
It's good and bad. It's not really, there's not anything in it that is provoking of life-changing decision-making, right?
I'm excited to have a voice that understands, like so many of those guys who write that kind of stuff, they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're talking about. They've been inspired by stories, but have no answers, no real deliverance short of the priest with the cross and the holy water. There's no, But
I don't think that was their intent neither. Mm-hmm. So whether they know it or don't know it, there's neither here nor there for me to say. I'm just saying I don't think that was their intent to start off with.
Right.
And I think entertainment has to stay entertainment. Mm-hmm. It is what it is. Right. I can't make, it's like you go to these fairs now and they want to make like an ice cream into a hot dog. Like you're like, what? I'm not putting ice cream on my hot dog.
Sure.
Yeah. That's just gross.
Yeah.
Like it just doesn't work.
When you have too much agenda.
Yeah, you have to keep it originally to what it was meant for, which is entertainment.
That's right.
It's the entertainment industry.
That's right.
If you want to preach, teach, educate, do all that, you need to go to the platform that does that.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Okay? And I think content can be used in a lot of different ways. But if you're going the theatrical route, if you're going the episodic route, if you're going that route, it has to be entertaining by good stories, good character development, really thought out, arcs of the whole thing, planned out in an entertaining way where you do have the struggles and you do have the victories and, you've got the hero's journey, get the whole thing. I mean, we're conditioned to seeing things like that. It's funny. I went to the theater the other day and I was in the theater and you sit down and they have like all these preaching things at you and you're partway through. It's kind of slow. And I'm like, and I'm in the business, and I'm just like, this is why it doesn't work. Mm-hmm. Like I came to sit down to just almost escape into this story.
Sure.
Right? To be entertained. Like this was what I've just worked a long day. I have fought all these problems. Like I've consumed all this I can consume in a day. I just want to have a good meal at the dinner and go to the movies with my husband and, be lost in a great story that I'm thoroughly entertained by. And if it's really done well, you're moved by it and you talk about it for the next couple of days.
Right.
Like how many people stayed talking about Maverick? It was just a good show. Mm-hmm. It's just a good show. That's the kind of level of content that I believe that we can make.
Yes.
And that we are called to make. And understanding to make it in such a way that it sparks conversations.
Right.
It shows different ways of thinking, brings light to different scenarios, all that kind of stuff through the medium of entertainment and storytelling. Can you have follow-up to that where you can help follow through with, it's like on everything you see that has suicide, now you have to put the phone number, call to get help.
Right.
That's because we're not doing an infomercial in the movie.
Right.
We're saying at the end, if you've had this, please reach out. You're not alone. If you've identified with parts of the story, you're not alone. And one of, I know, the hearts that we have here at the studio, and I know Laura too, she's developed a whole curriculum. She has a podcast. She's got a lot of ancillary things that go along with her books to help support this, from the stories that she has gotten from it. But it's like, somebody reaches out, hey, here's some curriculum to like dive into. I mean, you're not changing overnight, but it starts the conversation. And that's what I think we're all trying to do, is start a conversation and point them to an answer that can help them. Right. And that's a big passion of ours here at the studio, is to bring content to the world that inspires, invokes, maybe some hard conversations, some different ways of thinking, and then points them to more media that can help walk them through those things if that's what they choose.
Absolutely. And I think you touched on it, like what you were talking about, like it is this medium is not to beat someone over the head with your message. No. The audience has been trained in nuance. Yeah. They have been trained to pick up on nuances, on subtle looks, on subtext. The audience has been trained on subtext. They don't know it, but they have. Yep. And so now that it's like all of a sudden talking to an adult like a child. And you're like, no, we passed that. I can get the subtext. I can get where you're actually trying to take me here without you having to spell it out for me. That's right. That's the art.
Yeah, that is the art.
That's the art of the whole.
And that's a lot of the difference why Laura and I have talked some at links about her as a writer, an author, versus a screenwriter. Mm-hmm. And that's because this medium is so different. What you can get away with and how you have to say it in this box, is completely different than you can say it over here. Right. Your audience can get it here, and they want more, and they can go further, and they can pace it slower and whatever at their own time, right? I mean, me listening to the book, I may get a couple of chapters in, and then I got to take a break and go, I'm doing this, and I have to come back and pick the book up. Right. That's how that book works, right? Right. You have 90 minutes to 200 minutes to get a film. That's it. You're doing everything in one sweep. So it's just a completely different way of approaching it, and the content and how you deliver it.
That's true.
That's true. And how you write that. And I think that's where some, particularly on the faith side of things, has missed the mark a little bit. They were making a movie like as you're writing a book. Right. That doesn't work.
It doesn't work, and neither does everything being resolved in the end, even whether we're talking about faith-based or non-faith-based. It's just not real to life. Not that there can't be this satisfying ending. Of course, we want answers and solutions, and we want some things resolved, but it's been important to me not to put a pretty little unrealistic bow. Yep. I just don't like that. I don't think that's authentic.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Now, I do in entertainment. So my friend the other day was having a really bad day, and when I first got into the business, they're like, I know how you can make money. Do a horror film or a Hallmark film. Christmas Hallmark or horror. Isn't that funny? It's either Christmas Hallmark,
our favorites,
light, bright, fun, or horror. And I'm like, okay, I don't want to do either one of those. I don't live in fantasy land of, fairy tales or whatever. But I told my friend, I was like, hey, I feel like you just need to go binge watch a Hallmark Christian movie just to take your mind onto something that's just bright and happy, because it's entertainment. Right. Yeah. It's surely mindless thinking entertainment, right? Yeah. You're just lost in this love story or whatever. Now, the danger, the reason why I don't like it is you can start watching so much of that you think that's reality. It's just entertainment. Yeah. It's not reality. Sure. The love story always works out. The guy always wins over the girl. He always saves her. I mean, it's the same thing. Yeah. It's literally a formula that they have. Mm-hmm. Right. You're watching a formula play out because it works with our psyche. Right. Okay. But that's why I think it can't always win in the end. It's not also real. So as a smarter audience, like you're saying, the more intelligent we've got in audience, the more we've learned as an audience, the more we don't look for just that, right? Yeah. We look to be deeper stories, some storylines win, some don't. But especially if you're going to do a series, there can't be a fully finished.
Right.
So you are wanting to leave with a little like,
some things unresolved.
yes,
Yeah.
wait. You have to tell me what happens to get to the next one. Right. And that's part of this next generation, I think, that loves to binge watch. Is that they love the cliffhanger. If you think about binge watching,
Yes.
they pull you through the whole time. It's like a teaser the whole time.
True.
It's not like a regular movie like we've been used to before we could binge watch something.
Right.
Exactly. And that was actually a strategy in attempting not to allow the books to be boring. Was each chapter, if you read it, it strategically leaves you wanting that next chapter.
Yeah.
Very few chapters end with this resolution. It's more like things are resolved during the chapter, but then now I got to read more, and I got to read more, and that was very intentional.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, and another thing I love about this is this is not just a book. What do we have? We have 5.
There's
books?
3 that are currently out, and I'm working on the 4th and 5th.
Working on the 4th and 5th, and working on a screenplay.
Exactly.
And even potentially a series, There's this is a world.
Yes.
This is a world, and we haven't even touched on all of your, materials that you might, have to go with that to help
That's
people
right.
deal with all kind of things. So I don't do this often, but I'm so thankful that we have someone who is an expert, who knows this, who actually has walked these kind of things out, who is making this. That unfortunately is rare. And, and so I'm saying it to camera because I think that's a big deal. I think that's something that it's worth investing time into. I think it's worth going to watch. I think it's worth finding out about our friend here and all of those things. Yeah, totally.
Well, Laura, we could talk on this all day, and we have so much around here. We love it. We immensely support it. We're, helping pick it up and take it and do some things with it. And so how does the audience follow you, buy the books, listen to the books, first and foremost, all your other materials that go with it, follow you, your journey, keep up with this whole long journey.
Yeah.
How do they do that?
Thanks for asking. Yeah, the Delusion series is on Amazon. So it's the Delusion, the Deception, and the Defiance. So all 3 books are there, and they are in Audible form. And book 2 is almost in Audible form. Probably by the time you see this, it's coming out. So you can get all 3 books on Audible. My website is lauragallier.com, Gallier, lauragallier.com. And I have an e-newsletter that you can sign up for right there for free. And we will keep you posted on the movie effort, on more books coming out. And I would just also direct you to worthyprogram.com. It's actually a school curriculum, non-faith-based. It's also for parents and students in the home. We've been working really hard and collaborating with experts, and it emphasizes 21 affirmations about our self-worth, that if I believe these, and if young people believe these, we tend to be mentally and emotionally stable and resilient. But conversely, if I don't believe these truths, these universal truths about myself, then I tend to suffer with mental instability and be unstable. So again, we are working to get that in schools across the country, but it's also something you can buy and do right there in your home. So that's worthyprogram.com. So that's how to keep up with me.
And we will put all of those in the description and all of that kind of thing. So you'll be able to click, get, buy, do all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
So this has been great.
Yeah,
Been so great.
So grateful for the attention y'all are drawing to film done correctly. I want to say it that way. Media done correctly and with excellence and with the right spirit and the right quality.
Thanks.
Amazing.
Well, so good. Thanks for sitting with us, Kelly. It's been fun. You completely behaved this whole interview.
I know. I geeked out. I geeked out for a while on this whole vibing over here on all this.
Yes.
Loving it. But I behaved.
I loved it. You did.
Yeah.
You did. It was great. It was fun. So until next time, we'll see you on Set Life.